Stop making a scene. Who put those bruises on you?
The wet pavement reflected the red and blue flashes of the ambulance lights, but Layla couldn't focus on them. Brandon's grip on her arm was a vice, pulling her away from the emergency room doors. "Stop making a scene," he hissed. She squeezed her eyes shut, the bruise on her cheek throbbing. Before she could pull away, the air shifted. A shadow fell over them. A man in a tailored black suit stepped entirely into Brandon's space. A python tattoo curled dangerously up the side of his neck. He didn't look at Brandon. His dark, sharp eyes locked onto Layla's swollen cheek. He reached out, his knuckles brushing her jaw with terrifying gentleness. "Who put those bruises on you?" the Korean Mafia boss asked. The silence that followed wasn't a question. It was a countdown. For Layla Carter, surviving a grueling 12-hour shift in the ER was nothing compared to surviving Brandon Pierce. After discovering a discrepancy in her bank accounts that tied back to him, the confrontation in the hospital parking lot had escalated violently. Now, shivering in her blue scrubs with her stethoscope still heavy around her neck, she was completely out of options. Lee Woo-jun did not deal in saving people. He dealt in power, territory, and controlled violence. He had only come to the hospital to check on an injured lieutenant. But the sight of the terrified nurse and the man gripping her arm triggered a primal, absolute demand for order. When Brandon puffed out his chest and told Woo-jun to mind his own business, the Mafia boss didn't raise his voice. He didn't even blink. He simply signaled to the black SUV idling a few feet away. Within seconds, the power dynamic shattered. Layla, who had sworn off trusting any man after a lifetime of betrayals, found herself bundled into the back of a luxury vehicle by a complete stranger. A stranger whose dark, calculating eyes promised to burn down the world of the man who hurt her. The cold rain washed over the hospital parking lot as Layla backed away from Brandon. Her toxic ex-boyfriend grabbed her arm, his grip tight and painful. "You are not leaving me," Brandon hissed, his eyes wild. Layla trembled, the glowing red emergency lights reflecting in her tears. Just as she opened her mouth to scream for help, the heavy thud of footsteps echoed through the storm. A man stepped out from the shadows, his tailored black suit untouched by the weather. It was Lee Woo-jun. A dark, winding snake tattoo peeked from his collar, screaming danger. With a simple flick of Woo-jun's wrist, two massive bodyguards rushed forward. They grabbed Brandon, twisting his arms behind his back, and slammed his knees onto the wet pavement. Brandon gasped in shock, completely helpless. Layla stood frozen as Woo-jun slowly stepped closer. His dark, cold eyes locked onto hers, softening just a little. He reached out, gently offering his warm hand to her in the freezing rain. Will she take it? Layla hesitated for a second before placing her shaking fingers into Woo-jun's hand. He gently guided her into the back of a massive, armored SUV. The rich smell of expensive leather filled the quiet space as the heavy doors locked. Woo-jun pulled out a first aid kit and began cleaning the deep scratches on Layla's hand. As he wiped away a drop of her blood, it reacted strangely against the chemical wipe, turning a faint, glowing gold. Woo-jun froze. His breath hitched for a microsecond. He stared at her skin, recognizing a rare genetic marker from old, deadly syndicate legends. He quickly hid his shock, tossing the wipe aside before she could notice. "You are safe now," his deep voice rumbled. "Where do you live? I will take you home." Before Layla could answer him, the driver in the front seat suddenly slammed on the brakes and looked into the rearview mirror. "Boss!" the driver warned, his voice tight with sudden panic. Someone is following us." The SUV tires screeched as the driver sped up, easily losing the mysterious tail in the dark city streets. Woo-jun did not ask for Layla's address again. Instead, he drove her straight to his highly secure, fortress-like estate. Massive iron gates opened to reveal a beautiful but terrifying mansion, guarded by men in dark suits. Woo-jun led a quiet, stunned Layla into his grand penthouse. The walls were lined with expensive art and thick, bulletproof glass. "Oh, you will stay here tonight," he commanded softly. "No one can hurt you here." He called for his staff to prepare a room. An older Korean maid hurried forward, carrying fresh, warm towels. As the maid handed a towel to Layla, their eyes met. The maid gasped, dropping the towels to the marble floor in shock. She stared at Layla's face as if seeing a ghost. Without thinking, the frightened maid bowed deeply and whispered, "Jiyeon?" Layla froze in pure confusion. Oh, she had not heard or used that secret name since she was a toddler. Layla woke up in a giant silk-covered bed. For the first time in months, she felt completely safe. She slipped out of the room and walked quietly down the grand hallway, looking for Woo-jun. She found him sitting in his dark study, staring intensely at a computer screen. As she stepped closer, her heart stopped. He was looking directly at her private employment file from the hospital. Pages of her background checks and medical records covered his huge desk. "What are you doing?" Layla asked, her voice shaking with a sudden burst of fear. Woo-jun slowly turned his chair to face her. His dark eyes were serious and piercing. "I run background checks on everyone who enters my home," he explained smoothly. He picked up a piece of paper and tapped it with his finger. "Your records are perfect, almost too perfect. In fact, your social security number was only issued 5 years ago." He leaned forward, the shadows hiding his face. "Who are you really, Layla?" Across the city, Brandon walked into his office building, his knee still throbbing from the wet pavement. He expected a normal day, but when he reached his floor, his manager was waiting for him. The older man looked absolutely terrified, shaking as he handed Brandon a cardboard box. "You are fired." "Pack your things and leave immediately," his boss choked out before running away. Brandon gritted his teeth in anger. He knew Woo-jun was behind this sudden ruin. As Brandon angrily threw his belongings into the box, his hand brushed against a small, framed photo of Layla. His anger instantly melted away. His face twisted with a deep, agonizing guilt. He did not look like a toxic ex-boyfriend anymore. He looked like a man who had just failed a deadly mission. With a trembling hand, Brandon pulled out a burner phone and dialed a secret number. "It happened," Brandon whispered into the phone, his voice filled with frantic, desperate terror. "She is with Lee Woo-jun. I couldn't protect her. I lost her." Woo-jun did not push Layla for answers about her hidden past. Instead, he led her into the massive, gleaming kitchen. To her surprise, the dangerous Mafia boss rolled up his sleeves and began to cook. The sharp sound of a knife chopping vegetables filled the quiet room. Layla sat at the marble island, watching his strong hands move with unexpected care. The heavy fear in her chest began to fade, replaced by a strange electric pull toward him. When he placed a warm, perfect bowl of food in front of her, their fingers brushed. A sudden spark of heat rushed through her veins. Woo-jun looked deep into her eyes, his intense gaze softening into something that felt like genuine care. "Eat," he whispered gently. "You need your strength." Layla picked up her fork, finally letting her guard down for the first time in years. But just as she took her first bite, the penthouse plunged into darkness. Piercing red alarm lights suddenly flashed across the ceiling. A mechanical voice echoed. Someone had breached the impenetrable perimeter. Woo-jun moved with terrifying speed. He pushed Layla behind the heavy marble island and pulled a sleek gun from his waistband. Without a word, he slipped into the shadows of the dark garden. Layla covered her ears as the deafening sound of shattering glass and brutal fighting echoed outside. The struggle did not last long. Within minutes, Woo-jun dragged a heavily armed man back into the glowing red light of the kitchen. The intruder groaned in pain, his face bruised and bleeding from Woo-jun's merciless strikes. Layla peeked out from her hiding spot, her heart pounding against her ribs. As she leaned forward, the collar of her hospital scrub slipped down, revealing a strange, faded scar on her shoulder. The bleeding assassin locked eyes with the mark. His bruised face went completely pale with absolute terror. He stopped fighting Woo-jun's iron grip and stared at Layla as if she were a ghost. With his last breath before losing consciousness, the assassin choked out a terrified whisper. "The dragon lives." The terrified whisper of the bleeding assassin echoed in Layla's mind. She backed away from the broken man on the kitchen floor, her chest heaving with cold fear. This was not a safe house. This was a deadly war zone. Pure panic gripped her heart. She was convinced Woo-jun was just using her as bait in his dangerous underground world. Without another word, Layla spun around and bolted down the dark, grand hallway. She slammed her shaking hand against the elevator button, praying for the metal doors to open. She desperately needed to escape before she became the next victim. The shiny doors finally slid open, but a strong hand grabbed her arm before she could step inside. Woo-jun spun her around, his dark eyes blazing with an intense, frightening anger. He shoved her into the elevator and slammed his heavy fist against the reinforced glass right next to her head. The loud, sharp crack made her gasp in shock. He leaned in close. "Why do you constantly run from safety?" he demanded. Layla stared into Woo-jun's angry eyes, but instead of fighting back, she completely broke down. Hot tears spilled down her cheeks as she finally confessed the truth. She sobbed, telling him about Brandon's cruel psychological torment and his brutal betrayal. She explained how her toxic ex-boyfriend had made her terrified to trust anyone, especially powerful men who promised to protect her. As she cried, the fiery anger in Woo-jun's dark eyes completely melted away. He let out a long breath and gently pulled her into a warm, safe hug. He stroked her hair softly, his voice a deep, a comforting rumble. "I am not him," Woo-jun vowed. "No one will ever hurt you again." He held her close until her tears stopped falling. But the peaceful moment did not last long. Later that night, a heavy silence filled the study. One of his loyal guards walked in and placed a mysterious brown box on his secure desk. Woo-jun opened it, his face turning pale. Inside was a tiny lock of Layla's childhood hair. Woo-jun did not just promise to protect Layla, he took massive action. The very next morning, he made a quick phone call to his lawyers. Within a single hour, he secretly bought Brandon's entire apartment building. He immediately sent an official notice to formally evict the toxic ex-boyfriend, forcing Brandon out onto the cold streets. Woo-jun wanted to erase every trace of the man who had hurt her. Meanwhile, across the busy city, a desperate Brandon snuck through the back doors of the hospital. He wore a dark hoodie to hide his face from the security cameras. He carefully picked the lock on Layla's old staff locker and reached deep inside. His fingers brushed against a small, hidden flash drive taped to the back wall. He quickly pulled it out and shoved it into his pocket. He looked around the empty locker room, his face twisted with deep sorrow and terrible guilt. "I am so sorry, Layla," Brandon whispered to the silent room. "This is the only way to keep you alive." The frightening, violent events of the past few days had taken a heavy toll on Layla's body. Woo-jun insisted that his private, highly trusted doctor visit the penthouse to check her general health. The older doctor gently drew a small sample of Layla's blood to run some basic medical tests. Layla rested quietly in her grand room, finally feeling safe under the heavy guard of the massive estate. But deep in a secret underground medical lab, the doctor stared at his glowing computer screen in absolute shock. The test results made no sense for a simple hospital worker. His hands shook violently as he grabbed his secure phone and dialed Woo-jun's private number. Woo-jun answered quickly, immediately sensing the deep fear in the older man's silence. "Speak," Woo-jun commanded softly. "Boss," the doctor choked out in a total panic, his voice cracking with pure terror. "I just ran the genetic tests. Her rare blood type and specific DNA markers are completely impossible. She is not a normal orphan." "She belongs to the ancient missing golden dragon bloodline." Woo-jun ended the phone call, his heart pounding with dread. If Layla truly belonged to the golden dragon bloodline, her life was in terrible danger. Every rival syndicate in the city would hunt her down to steal her power or end her life. To keep her safe, Woo-jun made a difficult choice. He decided to completely hide her true identity from her. He could not let her know that she was a royal target. He called his top lieutenants into his dark study, his face completely serious. "Double the guards on every door," Woo-jun ordered sharply. Layla, who had walked out of her room to find a glass of water, paused in the quiet hallway. She hid in the shadows, listening to the deep voices echoing from the study. Her stomach dropped as she heard Woo-jun's final chilling command. "Do not let her leave this building," Woo-jun told his fierce men. "You must keep her locked in the penthouse at all costs." She was a prisoner again. Layla stormed into the study, her eyes blazing with sudden anger. She could not believe he was treating her like a captive. You promised to protect me, not lock me in a cage, she yelled, confronting him about his secret orders. Woo Jun stood up from his heavy desk, his jaw tight. You do not understand the danger outside those doors, he argued back, his voice rising to match hers. The argument quickly grew intense as years of built-up fear and stress boiled over. Layla pushed his chest, demanding her freedom, but he refused to back down. The high-stakes tension between them suddenly shifted from fierce anger to overwhelming, undeniable passion. Without thinking, Woo Jun pulled her close. They shared a breathtaking, desperate kiss, completely lost in the electric moment. For a brief second, the entire dangerous world faded away. But the beautiful silence was violently broken. A loud, sharp crack echoed through the room as a massive sniper bullet completely shattered the thick, reinforced glass window behind them. Woo Jun tackled Layla to the floor just as the bullet shattered the thick glass. He dragged her quickly toward the hidden wall panel, punching in a secret code. A heavy titanium door slid open, and he pushed her inside the dark panic room before locking it tight. In the small, enclosed space, their rapid breathing echoed loudly. The adrenaline from the attack made the air feel thick and electric. Layla pressed her back against the cold metal wall, her heart hammering as Woo Jun stepped extremely close to her. The intense physical chemistry between them was undeniable in the dark room. He reached out, gently touching her cheek to make sure she was not hurt. Suddenly, the glowing security monitors flickered to life on the wall, revealing the chaos outside. Armed men were storming the grand penthouse. Layla gasped as the camera zoomed in on the man leading the rival strike team. It was not a stranger. It was Brandon, marching right through Woo Jun's home with a cold, determined look on his face. Woo Jun could not stay hidden while enemies destroyed his home. He grabbed 2 heavy pistols from the safe room wall and opened the titanium door. Moving like a deadly shadow, he fought his way through the ruined penthouse. The fierce battle was loud and brutal. Within minutes, Woo Jun cornered the strike team leader in the wreckage of the beautiful kitchen. He kicked the gun out of Brandon's hand and slammed him hard against the broken marble island. Brandon coughed violently, sliding down to the floor as blood soaked his shirt. Woo Jun pointed his weapon right at Brandon's chest, demanding answers. Instead of begging for his life, Brandon looked up and began to laugh. It was a harsh, hollow sound, but his eyes held a deeply tragic sadness. You do not understand anything, Brandon whispered weakly, coughing up more blood. He gave Layla a painful, sorrowful look as she stepped out of hiding. I was paid to date her, Woo Jun. She is worth $50 million alive. The shocking confession from Brandon hung heavily in the quiet, ruined room. Layla stepped closer, staring at Woo Jun with wide, terrified eyes. She demanded to know what Brandon meant about her being worth so much money alive. Seeing no other choice, Woo Jun finally told her the dangerous truth. He explained the rare genetic markers in her blood and the ancient legends of the Golden Dragon Syndicate. Your real family ruled the greatest empire in the underworld, Woo Jun explained softly. They were assassinated when you were a baby, and you were hidden away in the orphanage. Layla felt the room spin wildly around her. She thought about the kind, quiet couple who ran the orphanage and raised her as their own daughter. As she connected the missing pieces of her past, a sickening realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The loving people who raised her were not her saviors. They were actually the secret sleeper agents who had brutally murdered her real family. The devastating truth about her fake parents broke something deep inside Layla. She fell to her knees in the middle of the broken glass, was sobbing for the family she never even knew. Woo Jun stood quietly, giving her the space to grieve the massive lie that was her entire life. But suddenly, the loud crying completely stopped. Layla slowly stood up, brushing the dirt off her hospital scrubs. The terrified, helpless hospital worker completely vanished. As she lifted her chin, something dark, fierce, and incredibly regal snapped into place. She looked like a true queen waking up to claim her stolen throne. Must the heavy fear that used to control her was replaced by a burning, unstoppable need for justice. She walked straight past the bleeding Brandon without even looking down at him. She stopped right in front of Woo Jun. Her eyes, once soft and warm, were now as cold and sharp as solid ice. Layla held out her hand, staring into his soul, and calmly asked him for a gun. Before Woo Jun could answer her shocking request, his private phone rang loudly. It was an emergency call from one of his hidden street spies. The remaining members of the rival syndicate had completely changed their deadly plan. Knowing they could not break into the estate again, they decided to attack the city hospital instead. The spies reported that heavily armed men were taking her innocent nursing colleagues hostage to violently lure her out of hiding. "We must lock down and plan a stealth strike," Woo Jun ordered his surviving guards. But Layla refused to hide while her innocent friends suffered for her royal bloodline. Without waiting for Woo Jun, she slipped out through the secret garage and drove an armored car straight into the city. When she arrived, the hospital emergency room was total chaos, filled with screaming patients and dangerous gangsters. The terrifying hitmen pointed their heavy weapons at the doctors. The front doors slid open, and Layla walked right into the chaotic ER, completely unarmed, to face them. The emergency room was a terrifying war zone, but it was her war zone. Layla ducked behind a metal medical cart as bullets shattered the glass doors. She knew every inch of this hospital. Crawling silently, she reached the medical gas storage. When a massive hitman stepped around the corner, she did not scream. She threw a heavy oxygen tank and quickly cracked the valve, filling the tight hallway with blinding, freezing gas. The man dropped his weapon, coughing wildly. Layla did not stop. She grabbed a defibrillator from a crash cart, charging the heavy paddles to maximum power. The rival lieutenant lunged at her from the shadows with a sharp knife. She dodged his strike and slammed the charged paddles directly into his chest. The electric shock sent him crashing to the tiled floor, completely unconscious. Just then, the emergency doors burst open. Woo Jun and his heavily armed men rushed inside, weapons raised. They froze in pure shock. Instead of finding a terrified victim, they saw Layla standing triumphantly over the defeated rival lieutenant. Back at the ruined estate, the air in the dark basement was heavy with sweat. Woo Jun tied Brandon to a heavy steel chair, demanding answers. But Brandon did not fight back. Instead, he completely broke down, crying with agonizing remorse. "I never wanted to hurt her," Brandon sobbed, his voice cracking with deep sorrow. "I made her dress terribly, I ruined her friendships, and I kept her terrified of the world. It was the only way." He looked up, tears washing the blood from his bruised face. If she looked completely unremarkable, the people hunting her royal bloodline would never find her. I was just trying to hide her from the real monsters. Layla listened from the shadows, her heart twisting with painful confusion. Her toxic abuser had actually been a desperate, warped protector. Woo Jun gripped Brandon's shirt, demanding to know how the rival assassins found the penthouse. So Brandon let out a tragic, shaking breath. "They did not find it," he whispered. "You have a mole inside your own inner circle." The terrifying confession changed everything. A dark, heavy cloud of paranoia settled over the penthouse. If there was a traitor in the inner circle, nobody could be trusted. Woo Jun immediately locked down the entire estate. He called his elite security team into the grand hall, his dark eyes burning with intense anger and suspicion. He pushed his loyal men to the brink, tearing through their personal phones, bank records, and secret messages to find the deadly leak. "No one leaves this room until I find the rat," Woo Jun roared, slamming his fist on a marble table. The guards stood frozen in fear, sweating under their boss's terrifying glare. Layla watched from the stairs, wondering which of these familiar faces wanted her dead. Suddenly, the main computer terminal beeped softly. Woo Jun marched over to the glowing screen, his face turning pale. The green lights on the digital map were turning red, one by one. His heart pounded with dread as he realized the truth. The estate's secure defense grid had just been quietly disabled from the inside. With the security grid completely down, the massive estate was defenseless. Woo Jun grabbed Layla's hand and pulled her into his private, windowless bedroom, locking the heavy steel door behind them. This was the calm eye of the dangerous storm. The quiet room felt like a different world. Layla sat on the edge of the bed, completely overwhelmed by the endless betrayals and violence. She buried her face in her hands, shaking. Woo Jun sat beside her, dropping his tough, fearless mafia boss act. He gently pulled her into a tight, warm hug. I am so afraid, he whispered, his deep voice trembling with raw emotion. I have built an empire, but I have never been so terrified of losing someone. I cannot lose you, Layla. He kissed her forehead softly, letting his deep vulnerabilities show for the very first time. It was a beautiful, peaceful moment of pure love, but the calm silence suddenly shattered. A hidden burner phone in Woo Jun's pocket buzzed loudly. The text message read, "Run! The assassins are already inside the walls." Woo Jun and Layla sprinted through the secret underground tunnels, dodging the sounds of heavy boots echoing above them. They reached the hidden garage just as Sung Woo, Woo Jun's loyal right-hand man, started the engine of a heavily armored SUV. "Get in!" Sung Woo yelled. They jumped into the vehicle, and the heavy tires screeched as they sped out into the rainy night. They raced toward the massive city bridge, desperate to escape the deadly trap. Suddenly, a dark figure rose from the shadows of the very back seat. It was the traitor. Before the rat could strike, Sung Woo violently spun around while still driving. He pulled his heavy gun, aiming it straight at the traitor in the back, not at Woo Jun. Gunfire exploded inside the tight cabin. The violent struggle knocked the steering wheel hard to the left. The heavy SUV smashed right through the thick metal guardrail of the towering bridge. Layla screamed as gravity pulled them down. The heavy vehicle plunged straight into the dark, freezing waters of the Han River. The freezing black water of the Han River rushed into the sinking SUV. Layla kicked the broken window, gasping for air. Beside her, Woo Jun groaned, his leg completely pinned beneath the crushed metal dashboard. "Leave me!" he choked out, swallowing dark water. Layla fiercely shook her head. Refusing to let him die, she grabbed his collar and pulled with all her hidden strength. The metal groaned and snapped, freeing him. She dragged his heavy, bleeding body through the freezing current and onto the muddy riverbank. Shivering violently, she hauled him into a dark, abandoned building nearby. It was a decommissioned, off-the-books syndicate safe house. But as they collapsed onto the dusty floor, Woo Jun coughed up a terrifying amount of blood. His face turned completely gray. He was suffering from massive internal bleeding. Layla frantically searched the dark room, finding an old, dust-covered emergency trauma kit under a broken table. She tore it open, her hands shaking. She had to operate right now, on a filthy floor, before his heart stopped forever. Layla worked through the long, terrifying night. Her hands, once used to changing simple bandages, now moved like a skilled surgeon. She used every tool in the old trauma kit to stop his heavy internal bleeding and stitch his deep wounds. By morning, Woo Jun finally opened his dark, exhausted eyes. He looked up at Layla, who was covered in dirt and dried blood. He weakly reached up, grabbing her hand with surprising strength. "You saved my life," he whispered, his voice thick with absolute, undying devotion. "I belong to you now, Golden Dragon." Layla finally felt a spark of real hope, but that small hope vanished the moment she turned on the safe house's old, fuzzy television. Every channel in the city suddenly switched to a terrifying live broadcast. The rival Mafia boss stared into the camera with a cruel smile. He had completely hacked the local news. "Bring me the girl," the evil boss threatened, his eyes cold and dead. "Give up Layla by midnight. Or the city hospital burns to the ground." Layla stared at the television screen in absolute horror. The evil boss was going to murder her innocent friends. "We have to fight him," Woo Jun said, trying to stand up, but his fresh wounds bled again. Layla gently pushed him back down. "No," she said, her voice completely steady and cold. "I am going to rule him." Remembering her true identity, Layla found a secure syndicate radio in the safe house. She bypassed the cruel rival boss entirely and broadcasted a secret, ancient code directly to the rival elders. The radio crackled with heavy, stunned silence. The powerful, hidden elders could not believe the lost heir to the Golden Dragon bloodline was alive. "I demand a truce," Layla ordered into the microphone, acting like a true queen. A raspy, terrifying voice finally answered her from the dark static. "We do not bow to ghosts," the elder hissed slowly. "If you are the true heir, prove it. We demand a dangerous, completely unprotected face-to-face meeting with you." The abandoned warehouse was incredibly dark and filled with heavily armed enemies. Layla walked right into the heart of the rival territory, her head held high. Woo Jun walked closely beside her, his hand resting near his hidden gun. In the center of the massive room sat the terrifying elders. The cruel rival boss stood nearby, sweating with pure panic as he realized he was losing control of his own army. He saw the powerful elders looking at Layla with deep respect. Driven by wild, desperate fear, the rival boss suddenly pulled his heavy gun and aimed it right at Layla's chest. "She is a fake!" he screamed, pulling the trigger. The gunshot echoed like thunder, but the deadly bullet never hit Layla. Brandon, who had been brought along in heavy steel chains as a prisoner, violently threw his body in front of her. The bullet struck him perfectly in the heart. He fell to the cold floor, dying to finally protect her the right way. Layla screamed as Brandon's lifeless body hit the concrete floor. The sudden, tragic sacrifice shocked the entire room, but Woo Jun did not waste a single second. The deadly distraction gave him the split-second opening he desperately needed. Moving faster than lightning, Woo Jun pulled his weapon and unleashed absolute hell on the panicked rival boss. The cruel enemy collapsed instantly. His reign of terror over the city finally finished. The massive warehouse fell completely silent. The heavy smoke from the gunfire slowly cleared away, leaving a tense, freezing chill in the air. The rival army nervously lowered their weapons, unsure of what to do next. Layla stepped carefully over the broken glass and blood, standing tall in the center of the bloody boardroom. She looked directly at the powerful elders sitting in the shadows. One by one, the terrifying ancient men slowly stood up from their chairs. They lowered their eyes and deeply bowed their heads to Layla. She had won. She owns their entire empire now. The dangerous war was finally over. A week later, Layla stood in the grand penthouse looking out over the glowing city. She was no longer a terrified hospital worker. She was the powerful golden dragon. But she did not want to rule the violent underworld. She called Woo Jun into her quiet study and handed him a thick leather folder. "I am officially giving you control of the Empire's daily operations," she told him firmly. "I only want to keep the massive medical charity to help innocent people." Woo Jun stared at her, completely amazed by her incredible kindness and strength. He stepped closer, his dark eyes filled with absolute love. "You are truly amazing," he whispered, gently taking her hand. The heavy tension of the past weeks finally melted away, replaced by a beautiful, hopeful silence. He promised to protect her new charity with his life. Then, his serious face softened into a nervous smile. He slowly reached into his tailored suit pocket. Layla gasped softly as Woo Jun pulled out a small, black velvet box. Layla stood proudly beside Woo Jun at the massive syndicate meeting, fully embracing her royal role as his equal. The dangerous men in the room bowed deeply to them both. But as the crowded room slowly emptied, an ancient elder stepped out of the dark shadows. He quietly approached Layla when Woo Jun looked away. Without speaking a single word, the old man slipped a dusty, secret envelope into her hands and vanished. Layla locked herself in the private bathroom and tore the heavy paper open. Inside were the original, unedited autopsy reports of her murdered parents. She scanned the terrible documents, but her eyes froze on the final page. A terrifying secret was stamped at the very bottom. The deadly hit was never ordered by the rival boss. Layla covered her mouth to stop a sudden scream. The encrypted royal signature that paid for her parents' brutal assassination belonged to Woo Jun's own bloodline. The man who had just bled to save her life had no idea his family killed hers. The real war was just beginning. What out for part 2 of this story? Lesson from this: pain can break you, but it can also reveal who you are meant to become. When courage meets loyalty, even the darkest past cannot stop a powerful future. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share so more people can experience it too. Turn on notifications so you don't miss out on part 2 and other interesting stories like this. Thanks for watching.